welcome to today's webcast on how to move the needle on student success next semester. I'm Scott Jasek, editor of Inside Higher Ed. I'm joined by my fellow editor, Doug Letterman. We're going to walk you through a PowerPoint and then take your questions and comments, which we very much want. First, just a little housekeeping. To ask a question, and you can ask a question at any time, use the Q&A screen on your computer. Just put in your question. And if you want to be identified, write that you want to be identified, or please write your institution or the type of institution you're at, anything that will help us have good information to understand your question. We're recording today's event, and it's also going to be transcribed for those with hearing disabilities. And we'd like to thank everyone for participating. So now let's get to it. And of course, okay, so there's Doug's and my name, contact information. Please feel free to reach out at any time with your questions on this webcast or other webcasts. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was the pandemic, which is still with us, but not so bad, or maybe not so bad. It all depends on your perspective. From some perspective, though, it's still with us, and it's still having a huge impact on student success. The pandemic generally exacerbated tensions that existed before the COVID pandemic, and has made things worse, particularly for institutions that serve many low-income and minority students. And that is a big part of the effort to improve student success. But on the other hand, it's important that we remember that the pandemic did not create problems with student success by itself. We had serious problems with student success from well before the pandemic, and that is just a reality. And I think it's important to remember that, just how things worked, because these were issues before we had the pandemic, and they will be issues after the pandemic is completely over, if it's ever over. The first thing I wanted to say is that student success is everyone's issue. And to illustrate this, I want to tell you a story about, I read lots of newspapers. And one feature that many newspapers do every year that I hate is to say that they're looking at student success by publishing the graduation rates of all the colleges and universities in their area. And so you get a chart that shows a private residential college that is very competitive in admissions, showing a very high graduation rate. Then you have a bunch of publics leading off with, and then ending with a community college with a low rate. And so the problem with this is it's totally predictable. It's what has happened every year. And the other problem is it lets people off the hook. It says, hey, if you're a top private college, maybe student success isn't your problem. Well, actually it is, because there aren't very many colleges with a 99% student graduation rate, and every college can get better in student success, every college. And it's not just the colleges like Cal State Northridge I wrote because they do a lot to promote the graduation scene that you see, but it's by being a central issue everywhere is how we're going to move on this as a country. Doug, did you want to add here?
Yeah, I want to first welcome everybody to the webcast, and thank you for joining us. We'll talk later about sort of how these issues apply differently at different kinds of places, and some of it in the next slide we'll talk about what student success means. The other way that student success is everyone's issue is that it's everyone's issue increasingly at each institution. It's no longer, and again, we'll talk some more about this later on, about sort of the different roles that different campus officials, different people on a campus play in student success as the definition of student success has broadened. But I think it's just this headline on this slide makes me just want to sort of reinforce the idea that student success is sort of, there are different roles for student success for different people on a campus, from the faculty to the days when it was the student affairs or student, depending on the name, student services office's problem are long gone, and it is a widespread sort of cross institutional issue.
Absolutely. So what is student success? So the obvious things to measure are completion of course, semester, and graduation. I'm going to say that all of these things, I'll give away the ending, are student success, but that is a very obvious way to measure student success. Persistence from semester to semester is also very important. One, it's how you get to graduation or completion, but also just how you stick around and show that you've got what it takes to graduate. Now, the next thing I want to say is that perhaps, and some people do say this, it's graduation in 4 or 2 for a community college. As you all probably know, at the federal rate is 6 years for a 4-year institution and 3 years for a community college. And those rates are low enough to suggest that there's a lot of room for improvement there. But increasingly, I am hearing more people talk about the importance of graduating in 4 or 2 for community college. They say correctly that most parents expect a student to graduate in 4, and so it's a disappointment that, for it to take 5 or 6 years, even if that means you can correctly list the person for your federal statistics. This is very hard for people to do. To graduate in 4 is very hard, and frequently it's not the student's fault that they can't graduate in 4. But that is an important issue. Who is completing? This involves looking at your different populations of your university. Are minority students completing at the same rate as white or Asian students? Are athletes completing at the same rate as non-athletes? Are people with disabilities completing at the same range? Student success is for all of these groups, and we should look at it. Student success increasingly includes looking at students' mental health and how they are faring. And frankly, they are faring poorly at many institutions and in general. Are they getting the help they need? And I would also just put in happiness here. Are the students who are graduating from your college feeling good about the experience such that they want to continue their education, their careers, feeling good about having attended your institution? And finally, after college, careers, graduate school, et cetera, all come into measures of student success. And so the reason I want to put these measures on, and I could come up with other measures as well, is that student success isn't about coming up with one silver bullet for achieving success. The strategies we're going to talk about today and the strategies that are leading institutions to success are some here, some there, some there. It's a joint project, a true community project that results in more students achieving student success. Doug, did you want to add?
Yeah, so a few points just to add to Scott's good ones. So first of all, the reason student success has become a focus is because there are many reasons, but one of them is because a perception that colleges were overly focused on enrolling students and frankly less worried about what students got from their educations. And we have seen certainly through various accountability measures and the greatly increased attention paid to student debt, et cetera, that as students and families have absorbed greater proportions of their educations as states have failed to keep up with meeting the demand, et cetera, et cetera. There is heightened expectations on institutions to ensure that the students they enroll get something of value. And so that's sort of at a broad level. The other, I guess, point I would emphasize is student success is going to vary depending on who your students are. And that's why there's potentially a long list of things that you sort of should be thinking about for every student. But again, different students, there are many students. If you've got an institution that serves a lot of part-time students, graduating in 4 years or 2 years if you're at a community college is just not feasible. And the success might well be getting students into a job or into some kind of situation where they can function well in society. And I think the last thing I'd say is that I think student success is going to continue, the definition is going to continually change as students' expectations for what they get when they enroll change. And I think broadly, I would define that as over time, and this is not a 2-year trend or a 5-year trend or maybe even a 10-year trend, but people are increasingly going to be enrolling for shorter periods of time and with the expectation that they're going to flow in and out more regularly. And so looking for sort of smaller units and shorter periods of measuring what counts as success is going to be necessary.
Then there's the question of how do you measure statistics, measure student success? And I'm going to say here that I think a good student success strategy is based on all 3 of these bullets. One is statistics on what students are doing. And these days, a college can get statistics on just about everything, on student success rates in courses, failure rates in courses, which courses are more students graduating or more students succeeding or failing in. You can get statistics on how many students go to the library, how many students go to the student union on a Friday night. You can get statistics on just about anything. But if you look at that from a student success perspective, you want to ask, what does it show about what students are doing? And then to analyze which students are succeeding. Students who completed X number of credits, are they likely to graduate on time or late or early or whatever? So statistics of true statistics is one thing. Then there are surveys of students. And I think these are also important. It's important to know what students think about everything at a college, and you can find out by surveying them. That doesn't mean that they are, that they have the same accuracy, so to say, of statistics on what students are doing, but it's another source of information. And then anecdotes, I simply, report that a good college president or dean or professor is listening to students all the time and is finding out things. And I do agree that I very much agree with all those who point out that anecdotes don't make up statistics, but at the same time, an anecdote that is studied and reflected on can yield important insights. So I think it's all 3 of these that need to be measured to develop a good strategy. Doug, did you want to add here?
Yeah, I'd probably I'd add it may be a sub bullet of the first one, but I think increasingly institutions are finding, and I think they will increasingly find that some of the various forms of technology that they utilize, particularly on the academic side, but not only. There are all sorts of technologies that institutions use that collect data about student behavior, student patterns, collectively and at the individual level. And again, raises privacy issues that institutions have to be very aware of. but both sort of broad patterns about when students use the internet and that provide broad bandwidth data at the institution, at the structural level, at the institution individual level, which students are utilizing the LMS and which ones have never touched it. And there are all sorts of data that are available now and that are increasingly going to be available as colleges use technology to intermediate what they do, that again can be used wisely, cautiously, but hopefully helpfully.
Yes. So now what are some of the things that colleges are doing that they're seeing makes a difference? And one of the things they're doing is they are demanding or asking faculty to create a supportive syllabus. What is a supportive syllabus? So a syllabus tells everything about a course, what you're going to study each week, when the tests are, et cetera, et cetera. But it's also a key document, whether in a piece of paper or on a computer, that gives a student a sense of the class, of the faculty member, and of what the student is doing there. So faculty members may want to write in their syllabus a statement of support for their students. I hope you do well and find whatever the subject matter is interesting. Or many faculty are writing a statement of support for students with disabilities. I've designed the course in this way. Let me know if there's a problem. And in a way as well, some faculty members are telling a little bit about themselves, what their background was, especially if they are a first-generation college student or something like that. So the point is that a syllabus doesn't need to just be what the reading assignments are. It can be much more, and this can be very effective in terms of helping students. Next is getting students into a community. And this is something several universities, or many universities, are working with companies to do. What they're finding is that students, from the time they are admitted to a college, will get arrangements with students about, well, who wants to be my roommate, who wants to prepare for such and such a course or whatever. But some colleges are encouraging these groups and encouraging them to have a bit of structured conversation on things that will encourage students. Again, students are more likely to use support services if they don't view it as something that identifies them, as dumb. And a lot of students really are worried about being identified in a certain way. So, if you can use the apps or other tools, you can defeat that and create a good environment for students. The next thing I want to talk about is connecting with professors. And I want to just read this quote quickly. I walk in and can tell in 1 second that he does not want me there. Do you think I ever went back for office hours? No. And I can still see his face when I walked in that room. This is a professor recalling his first experience with office hours in the late 1960s. And I have to say, having gone to college in the 1980s, that in some ways it hadn't changed that much. There was a sense that you went to office hours with a purpose of seeing a professor and maybe getting something, but there was not as much of a sense of going to office hours to just talk about the course, about the subject matter that's interesting to you. And I use this as an example with the office hours because office hours are but one way that students and faculty interact, but it's in a very important way because in most cases, the professor is making putting up on his or her door something that says, I will be here during these hours. You can come and attend a class. If you attend a meeting with me, if you want during that time. That's very important for students, and something that I think many will respond to. But then when they go, you need to have the right attitude about it, and to encourage your faculty members to have the right attitude about it. Doug, did you want to add here?
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a couple of later slides. But the role of the faculty member in student success broadly, I think, again, that's been something that has been developing over time. But I don't think there's any doubt that the pandemic, I think there's been a lot more talk about the role professors need to play in a bunch over the last 5 to 10 years. What I think the pandemic changed the most was professors' own sense collectively about how significant their role is. And that's partly because one of the major things the pandemic did, especially at the beginning, when institutions essentially shut their campuses on the whole, was to strip away a lot of the other they didn't always necessarily strip away the supports, but what was stripped away was access and direct visibility, sight lines by students to some of those other offices. And so much more flowed through. Students didn't have access to coaches or sports coaches because their teams weren't playing. They didn't have access to, they couldn't walk into the tutoring center or the writing center. So a lot more things flowed through the professor, and the professor became the face of the institution for students. And I think the professors gained a much greater sense of student needs and students as people. And if there are things to be hopeful for out of the pandemic, it's that increased awareness sticks, and professors sort of see more maybe than they did before, again, collectively. And there were always professors who did some, and some more than others. But I think there was a collective understanding and appreciation for student struggles, student needs. And so I think there is that has a lot of implications for support and training. It has support. And again, those are some of the things we'll talk about.
And now I want to talk more broadly about the role of professors. And I guess what I really want to get at here is that it's more than teaching their subjects, however important teaching their subjects is. If you're a professor, you've earned a PhD in a discipline, you have spent years of your life learning something that you want to teach, whether it's physics or French or sociology or whatever. You have devoted your life to that discipline that excites you, that interests you, that you feel students should study and gain from. And it's so important that you teach that discipline well. That's everything. But the important thing about professors is that they also convey a significant role in what is possible. If students are struggling with multiple courses, can a professor help them figure out a good study strategy? Or can a professor teach them what are the good tools that the university makes available somewhere? Now, a range of other things. The important thing is, though, this isn't what faculty were trained to do. Most faculty were trained, they earned their PhDs, not in teaching, but in their discipline. And so the reality is, at many colleges, what we are asking of faculty today is to do more than they were trained to do. And many faculty are responding to that and are definitely doing that. But some faculty are a little confused by that process, by what they're trained to do. And that is very, very unfortunate. But it's a reality. So it's important to really consider that when you are thinking. Also, I just wanted to say, we do have we have a few more slides, and then we'll be getting to your Q&A. So we'd welcome your questions. Doug, were you going to add something here?
Yeah, a couple things. So I think we did see during the pandemic a lot more recognition by institutions about the need to support professors, and a lot of it was focused on helping them learn to use the LMS and to use Zoom and to so a lot of it was focused um, on technology, but there was also a fair bit of focus on pedagogy. And I do think I'd like to think that institutions, that the fact that institutions flex that muscle and recognize that if they offered training in things that faculty members needed, that faculty members would respond. I'd like to think that will last, because there's a lot more work to do. Among certain things in the some of what Scott talked about can be achieved through better training, better support. The area that I think we have is probably will be slower to evolve is in changing the reward systems. And we know that faculty members are many of them are very rational creatures, and they respond to the rewards that are set in front of them, just like the institutions do. And if faculty members at your institution are rewarded mostly for their research, and again, you may have tenure and promotion sort of guidelines that value teaching, that purport to value teaching and service as much as research, but everybody sort of knows that may not be the case. Again, different institutions are different in how they handle that. But I think there is going to be an increasing need for institutions to not just give more support to faculty members and training to faculty members in terms of how they can be sort of partners in a student success agenda, but also to change the reward structure. And the last thing I think, and this is to turn it back to the faculty a little bit, is faculty members need to view students' instruction, not just instruction, but certainly the academic side of student success, as more of a team sport. And they need to view the academic support people who are around who are around the course and around the academic program more as partners. And I'd like to think that that's something that the pandemic sort of reinforced for people on sort of both sides of what can be a divide. And it would be nice if it wasn't as much of a divide going forward.
Definitely, that's the case. So now I want to talk about minority groups. Do they graduate at the same rates? Generally, Black and Latino students graduate below the rates of white and Asian students. I say generally because there are institutions where they all graduate at the same rates, or some graduate at higher rates than the white or Asian students. But it is absolutely essential that a college constantly be looking at this. And if you are the typical college where Black and Latino students graduate at lower rates, you've got to ask why. And the reasons are complicated and they vary from campus to campus. But what's encouraging is that colleges that have truly focused on this have found things they can do, and they've narrowed or eliminated the rates. But you'll only do that if you pay attention to the rates. Do minority students have mental health needs? The answer is yes, definitely. And do they use campus resources? Well, not so much. They generally are, fewer of them use the campus mental health center or other resources than do other students. Well, it's an obvious question. Why is this? What can be done to attract them to use your services? Are they happy? And again, I just come up with, I don't mean to be, giving you a impossible to meet standard, but if your white students are happy, then your minority students should be happy. And how do you find, do you ask them, are they happy? And I think this is a very important question. Do they report incidents of racism and widespread incidents of racism? And Here, I am not saying that every report you receive is true, but if they report incidents of racism, you've got to assume that that this is a problem, and then that leads to how you're going to change it. Doug, did you want to add here?
Yeah, I guess I don't in any way want to undercut the emphasis on students of color and students from ethnic and racial minoritized groups. But I guess I would broaden this slide to, when I was talking before about sort of understanding who your students are. There are lots of groups of students on your campus that have different needs, different outcomes, different strengths and different problems, and I guess it is going back to Scott's. The first bullet here is about looking at their graduation rates. I think if you are not doing significant sort of deep cuts of your student population based on really looking at, and again, it's not that every group needs to be treated differently, but you have to have a sort of fairly sophisticated understanding of which students are thriving in which ways and which ones are not thriving, and potentially there are different approaches, or at least twists on different approaches for different groups. But you can, and we could create a long list of groups that need that kind of attention. And I guess I just put in a plug for thinking that way.
Sure. And one such group is students who are parents. And they are getting a little more attention these days. That's a lab school that you see of children of students. And anyone who has been a parent of a young child can certainly attest that they are busy people, and that they demand a lot of attention, of time, of resources. And it's really hard for people to continue on as students, full-time or part-time, while also caring for children. So you need to ask yourself, as some universities are creating resources, that they may be as simple as creating a statement of appreciation for their parents, of honoring their parents. They may be more complicated, by like creating a lab school so that parents can drop off their children, and this can also extend to daycare, and have them be cared for during the day by trained professionals. There are all kinds of things that can go on. If they aren't happening, you can be sure that you are going to be losing some of your students. Students with disabilities is another such group. And here I'd suggest that you start off by assuring that all of your students are met with their full legal rights. This means buildings need to be accessible, that courses need to be accessible, that online materials need to be accessible. And that's great, and you need to do all of that. But don't view that as the end point. Think about, are your students with disabilities being helped, genuinely helped by professors and others, so that they truly feel wanted and that somebody is helping them succeed. Students with disabilities, if they are made to feel welcome, are more likely to succeed. And a lot of that is just basic, civility, along with the complicated task of knowing what your students' legal rights are and knowing that they are met. Online education and remote education. This is a very tricky issue, because we heard when most students engaged in remote learning at the beginning of the pandemic, that many of them didn't like it. And it's not their fault, because it's not really the best online education, in that it wasn't planned like online education that is well done, should be planned. But that means that today you have a lot of students who maybe have a fuzzy feel for what online education is. Likewise, you have some professors who have a fuzzy feel for it. You should consider, are there situations where online education is better for your students or for a subset of your students? And be sure that you're offering that. At the same time, you want to be sure you're offering in-person education for those who want in-person education. So I want to again thank NAC and Civitas Learning for supporting this webcast. And Doug, do you have a first question?
Sure. Somebody asked, I'd like to have a definition of student success. This was actually asked before we provided our definition, but the person goes on to say, on our campus, we have faculty who equate student success as something that is in opposition to rigor. And I think this is an important issue to raise. Back when in the ancient days when Scott and I were in college, as he was referring before, it was very common for the typical professor to assume that a significant portion of his or her students might not make it through. I mean, maybe not would definitely fail out or would definitely fail the course, but there was an expectation that certain students were going to rise, certain students were going to fall, and it was going to depend, sure, on how well I taught, but a lot on how much work the student put in, and I guess what has absolutely changed, and I think this is there are a whole set of reasons for it. We both talked a little bit about it in terms of student spending on their educations and et cetera, but the expectations have changed and it's not, I don't think it's true that institutions are just expected to help students get through no matter what. I mean, it is not, but I understand what this person is saying about the view of faculty members that more students succeeding necessarily means that the rigor is less. I don't think that's the case. What I think and this came up a lot during the pandemic. We saw a lot of institutions put in temporary policies that that involve more flexibility in terms of deadlines and in assignments and all sorts of things. And there was a real, and I would say the debate right now is, does flexibility equal lack of rigor? I think that's a sort of something that we've been hearing a lot about. I do think the expectations on institutions and on individual instructors have increased, and it is more the norm that it is sort of a shared responsibility, including by the professor and all the other people involved in academic and student supports and the institution, along with the student, to that more students ought to be able to, and again, to succeed with the appropriate amount of help and support. And again, I understand why for an individual faculty member that may seem like, well, I should just be able to put my content out there, and those who engage with it well and who come to office hours, et cetera. But it is an important conversation to have, and I would want those faculty members who feel that way to raise it. But I think that's why it's a group effort on a lot of people's part and not just the professor's responsibility.
Here's a question. Scott, you raised the point about faculty being experts in their discipline, not necessarily teaching. Have you seen any national efforts to change tenure processes to better value teaching quality or teaching certifications, or how faculty are recognized for supporting students? Yes, there have been efforts. I mean, in some cases, these efforts are by groups that are providing the certifications. Some organizations say, okay, get your PhD in English or biology or whatever, and also get a certificate that says I can teach, that says, that says you have demonstrated the ability to teach. And in some cases, it's the ability to teach community college, or the ability to teach people who are not like the people you went to college with, which is quite logical because to the extent many PhD students do learn to teach, it's by being a TA at their institution where they're earning a PhD, and they are teaching the well-prepared students how to succeed. Having said that, however, most of the real hiring decisions and promotion tenure decisions by university are by individual colleges and universities. And so it is there that you have to judge what's going on. And I see two trends. One trend is for this to get more attention and for places that are putting more of an emphasis on it. On the other hand, I see a lot of colleges that seem to be taking advantage of the tight job market in academic positions to say they want more publishing, more research. So it sort of goes both ways. And I don't think there's a clear national trend aside from the experts who say there should be more emphasis on teaching. I'm not sure there's yet a trend at institutions. Doug?
Yeah, students who need most help, and these are usually underrepresented groups, broadly defined, students with disabilities, documented or not, are usually the ones who do not participate in surveys and who do not connect with professors or their peers. What can be done to reach out to them? How can we ensure that their needs are included into policy and practices development? This is really tricky because, again, I was just talking about sort of the responsibility of the institutions and professors to reach out to students. There are certainly always going to be students who don't want to participate or are reluctant to participate for a variety of reasons, and there are limits on how much those students can be led to water, as the old saying goes. There's a few interesting. I think building a real clear understanding of how different groups of students on your campus like to learn and tend to want to learn is really important. I just wrote a story a few weeks ago about a new effort to build open access, basically OER versions or very low cost versions of high quality online courses in gateway courses. And some of the people doing research on that had done some work at teaching and learning centers at students that serve a lot of a couple of historically Black institutions and institutions that serve a lot of Black students. And one of the learnings was that that group of students at that institution, at least, the students tended not to want to ask for help. They tended to be embarrassed about asking for help, to view it as a sign of weakness, et cetera. And so one of the things that people making this virtual course are doing is building into this course, and what the professors would tend to say in that circumstance is, well, listen, if you need help, just email me. For a lot of those students, sending an email to a professor was a nerve-wracking experience. So the makers of this courseware are building into the courseware templates for students and templates for instructors to sort of help the communication flow. And one of the templates is asking for help, asking for academic help from a professor. And so basically at this moment when a student is sort of nervous about getting help and reluctant to get help and nervous about the prospect of creating a sort of high pressure email, giving help. So it's a long way of talking about sort of trying to understand and just asking students who come from different backgrounds, who have different needs, what would most help them, and then trying to find tools or develop practices that serve those students with those particular needs.
We've got a very similar question. I am a success coach for Catawba College You spoke about students utilizing resources. How would you recommend to promote those resources to make sure they're being utilized? So I'll give another example of something colleges are doing. I'm forgetting which college this was, but we wrote about it a few years ago. They found that the students were very reluctant to seek out help because they thought it would identify them somehow as particularly needy, and that they wouldn't, as a result, they would rather fail a course or do poorly in a course than seek out help. What they did is they recruited students who had sought help and who were particularly successful, who, you know, were the student body president, were the star athlete, or whatever. They were big men and women on campus, and they had them tell their stories in programs for all freshmen. And they found that it made a huge difference because the students identified with those who did seek help, and that seemed to make a difference. So, you know, and that's something you can do for, you know, doesn't cost anything. So, so I think it's important to look at a range of activities that you can do on student success. Doug?
Yeah, this is somebody talking about referring to what I was talking about before about sort of whose responsibility student success is. I am the AVP of Student Affairs / Student Success, and the burden of success is still in student affairs. I just thought this morning that the classroom is the nucleus of retention, but the onus to retain is still with the enrollment management division. The model of the sage on stage is antiquated, and we need to move the quote needle on how student success is viewed. So there's been a trendlet. I think it's I wouldn't call it a full-blown trend yet, but I think it is happening more and more of institutions formally merging their academic affairs and academic and student affairs units. Because, and I do think that this question of whose responsibility is, it's called retention from the institutional standpoint. It's called persistence when you think about it from the student standpoint. You know, are the students persisting at the institution? But that is, it is a, I think this person's very right that the responsibility for retaining students has historically been in the student affairs and student success part of the institution, which is academic adjacent, but not always, not directly academic. And I do think that, and again, I don't know that you have to change the structure to make that a reality, but I do think that the sort of unifying the missions and aligning the missions of the people responsible for all of the student support things that are sort of around, both around the classroom and beyond, with what actually happens pedagogically in the classroom and in faculty training and development and all that. Again, it's a big job, but it's I think it takes a mindset approach to think about that, to start to unify that work.
Here's another question. As we continue in the online learning platform, do you think the need for faculty development in the area of online teaching, do you think will be there, I assume? And I'd say absolutely. Look, with faculty members, the question of what you can give them for faculty development as opposed to what you can require of them for faculty development is a very tricky question. But one, there are some professors who have not taught online who would like the experience of teaching online, but don't feel prepared to do so. The other thing is, at many colleges, there may be a need to go online quickly or for a long period of time. And, you know, there's the question of, are the faculty ready? This is what came out during the very beginning of the pandemic, when everyone became an online teacher, but most faculty members had not, or I don't know if I want to say most, but many faculty members had not ever trained to be an online teacher. This, is very distressful to the faculty member and the students. And so I'd say absolutely that should be a key area. Doug?
Yeah. So I guess there's a handful of questions in here that I would sort of pull together, and it's about kind of what we should be training faculty members to do to improve student success. And I think there are a bunch of things. One is, and somebody mentioned the Sage on Stage and the lecture. Some of this is about pedagogical change. And again, this is, again, thinking about things that the pandemic accelerated. It was clear that it has been clear for a while that the lecture is not the best tool by itself, certainly, and exclusively. I mean, it's not that the lecturing can never be effective, but it isn't sorry, it isn't active, and it isn't interactive, and it doesn't involve peer-to-peer. It doesn't involve many of the practices that have been proven to engage students. And so, I think the lecture, there were a lot of institutions, weirdly, that as they went sort of remote, there were professors who ended up doing more lecturing than they had before. But I think there was and I think students in general learn better when they are engaged with the learning, and when they are involved in the learning activity. And some of that is instructor to student, a lot of it is student, peer to peer. So some of it is, there's just pedagogical change that again wouldn't normally be thought of as a retention or persistence tool, but is. There's all sorts of stuff around assessment. There's all sorts of stuff around involving technology, and there's all sorts of stuff around sort of building community. So, and again, this is a big job, and again, the faculty development is only a part of the retention and persistence and student success movement, but I think it's probably the part that I don't know, that where there may be the biggest job to do. And I hope institutional leaders take that seriously, because they can't just leave faculty members out there kind of on their own.
In your research, did you find any information on academic coaching impacting student success? How important is it to have academic coaching available to all students, including STEM majors? I'm not going to answer the second part of the question. I think I know the answer, but I'm not sure. But generally, the research on academic coaching has found that for many students, an academic coach can be a key factor in helping them to succeed. The fact is, a coach can do many things that we've been talking about here today, can help line up resources, can put pressure to devote the right amount of time to schoolwork, etc. And there is a lot of evidence that coaching does work. I've seen less research on coaching for every student, but it's logical that would help them too. Whether that is the best thing for your university or not, or college or not, I don't know. It sort of depends on your campus and on your students. I guess I want to close by thanking you all, by thanking NAC and Civitas Learning for their support, and just encouraging you to give it your all to work for student success next semester and the semester after that. Thank you.